Hey there, fellow literature explorers. Today, we turn our gaze toward The Conjuring, a 2013 supernatural horror that offers much more than narrative surface. It's a text rich with thematic complexity, symbolic resonance, and intricate character work that invites rigorous analysis. I'm delighted you've joined me, because in this video, we'll engage in a detailed examination of its cinematic language, narrative structure, and intertextual layers that shape its meaning. We'll begin by situating the film within its cultural and theoretical context, unpacking its stylistic choices and the director's auteur signature. Next, I'll provide a concise yet nuanced overview of the narrative arc, highlighting the film's core motifs without diluting its interpretive possibilities. From there, we'll delve into a compelling plot summary that foregrounds its narrative strategies and rhetorical devices, all framed to prepare you for the unfolding complexities. Crucially, we'll tease key thematic elements and pivotal narrative shifts, those moments that challenge conventional readings and open the text to multiple interpretations. Throughout, expect us to consider character dynamics, cinematic techniques like mise-en-scene and editing, and the film's engagement with broader discourses in film and literary theory. Prepare to engage with this film not just as viewers, but as scholars, questioning, interpreting, and appreciating the layers beneath its surface. So, get comfortable, sharpen your critical lens, and let's embark on an intellectually rewarding exploration of this cinematic work. There is something almost timeless about the way this story begins, not with grand spectacle, but with an unsettling stillness that grows into dread. At first glance, it might seem like just another haunted house tale. Families moving into old creaky homes, strange noises in the night, pets refusing to enter certain rooms, doors that creak open without explanation. All of these elements are familiar to the genre. Yet familiarity here is not weakness, it is strategy. The director embraces the audience's recognition of haunted house tropes, but then pushes them deeper, layering atmosphere with symbolic weight, grounding the supernatural with an almost documentary-like realism. It feels less like we are being told a ghost story and more like we are reading a case study, a Gothic text reframed through the lens of realism. The introduction of the central figures, Ed and Lorraine Warren, situates the film within a cultural dialogue about faith, psychology, and the limits of rational explanation. They are not portrayed as opportunists, but as people who carry both the burden and the blessing of their vocation. Their presence reframes the haunted house from a space of private terror into a site of public investigation, where domestic spaces bleed into cultural anxieties. In this sense, the narrative takes on a mythic structure. Ordinary family meets extraordinary horror, but under the guidance of intermediaries who straddle two worlds, the rational and the spiritual. This narrative strategy, of framing horror as both deeply intimate and culturally expansive, is one of the film's most effective choices. The overview of the story centers on the Perron family, who move into a secluded farmhouse in Rhode Island with hopes of building a new chapter of their lives. Almost immediately, things begin to fracture. The mother notices bruises forming on her body without explanation. The children complain of strange noises, of being tugged in their sleep, of a darkness that settles into the corners of their rooms. Even the dog, who senses what the humans cannot, refuses to enter the house, a symbolic marker of primal recognition, the intuition of animals as the first detectors of evil. What begins as unease grows into escalation. Whispers become screams, shadows become apparitions, and fear becomes violence. The house itself transforms into a stage where psychological realism collides with supernatural dread. The Warrens' arrival introduces another layer to the narrative. They do not dismiss the family's experiences as delusion, nor do they exaggerate them into spectacle. Instead, they approach with measured observation, setting up their instruments, recording sounds, documenting anomalies. Their work becomes a narrative device, providing a rational framework through which the audience can process the horror. Yet beneath their professionalism lies a deep sense of vulnerability. Lorraine's psychic sensitivity, in particular, is both her gift and her curse, making her fragile in the face of overwhelming evil. Her visions, drenched in chiaroscuro lighting and fragmented editing, symbolize not only the supernatural presences in the house but the psychological toll of seeing what others cannot. What makes the plot so compelling is the careful rhythm of escalation. The film refuses to rush toward chaos. It builds dread through patience, through restraint. A clap in the dark becomes more terrifying than an apparition. A door creaking open becomes more horrifying than a scream. This narrative strategy mirrors Gothic literature, where suggestion is often more potent than revelation. The director understands that the mind fills silence with fear, and he manipulates that silence masterfully. Even when the horror becomes explicit, when spirits are revealed, when possession manifests, it never loses its weight, because the foundation of unease has been so carefully laid. The brief summary of events is, on the surface, straightforward. A family moves into a farmhouse. Strange occurrences intensify into terror. Paranormal investigators are called in. They uncover a history of witchcraft and curses tied to the land. An exorcism becomes inevitable. Yet within this simplicity lies richness. Each step is infused with motifs. Motherhood as vulnerability and strength, family as both target and salvation, the home as both sanctuary and prison. The haunting is not random. It is targeted, symbolic, thematic. The film's rhetorical devices transform cliché into allegory. And as we tease the key elements, we must speak of the motifs that echo throughout. The use of children's games, for instance, the hide-and-clap sequence, becomes both a source of innocence and terror. It symbolizes the intrusion of horror into the domestic, the transformation of play into dread. The motif of touch, the bruises on the mother's skin, the invisible hands tugging at the children, becomes an allegory for violation, for how evil invades the body as well as the home. The repeated image of clocks stopping at 3:07 a.m. ties the events to ritual, to cycles, to the idea that horror is not chaos but pattern. Perhaps the most significant twist is the revelation of the house's history, of the witch who cursed it and sacrificed her child, vowing to haunt all who would trespass. Here, the narrative reaches into cultural memory, invoking fears of witchcraft, of maternal corruption, of history as an inescapable burden. The house is not just haunted, it is tainted, soaked with the residue of ritualistic violence. The family has not simply moved into a new home, they have stepped into a palimpsest of horrors, layers of history pressing upon the present. This revelation transforms the story from a simple haunting into an intergenerational allegory of trauma. The climax, where possession takes its strongest hold, brings all of these elements to their peak. The mother, symbol of nurture, becomes the vessel of corruption. The mother, symbol of nurture, becomes the vessel of corruption. Her possession embodies the fear of domestic betrayal, that the very figure meant to protect children becomes the one who threatens them. The exorcism is both literal and symbolic, a struggle between love and violation, between family unity and the forces that seek to shatter it. The visual language of this sequence, the darkened cellar, the physical contortions, the screams juxtaposed with the Warrens' prayers, creates a tapestry of conflict where body, spirit, and family are all at stake. Even as the story resolves, the thematic questions remain. Evil has been expelled, but the scars linger. The family is together, but the memory of trauma remains. The Warrens return to their home, but they too carry the weight of what they have witnessed. The narrative refuses easy closure, reminding us that horror, once touched, cannot be fully erased. It lingers like grief, like shadow, like memory. What makes this story so resonant, then, is not simply its scares but its layering of meaning. It is about the fragility of safety, the vulnerability of family, the way history invades the present, the way grief and trauma leave imprints that cannot be erased. It is about the thin line between play and dread, between touch as affection and touch as violation, between home as sanctuary and home as prison. The film is not just a haunted house story, it is a Gothic meditation, an allegory dressed as horror, a text that speaks to both primal fears and intellectual questions. As we move deeper into analysis in the coming sections, we'll uncover more of its thematic richness, its symbolic echoes, its intertextual connections. But for now, in this introduction, overview, summary, and tease of key elements, we've laid the groundwork. What awaits is an exploration of characters, settings, production, and deeper critical insights. For now, we carry with us the reminder that horror is never only about what scares us. It is about what it reveals, about families, about history, about ourselves. And that, perhaps, is why this particular story endures. Because beneath the shadows and screams lies truth. A truth that we, as explorers of literature and cinema, cannot ignore. It begins not with thunder, not with an immediate scream, but with something deceptively ordinary. A case that Ed and Lorraine Warren recount, one that seems simple at first but already foreshadows the dread to come. A pair of young women, nursing students, speak of a doll named Annabelle. Its face is childlike but grotesque in its stillness, its porcelain smile cracked, its eyes wide and unblinking. They tell the Warrens that the doll moves on its own, that it writes notes in a childish scrawl, that its presence drains them of comfort. The Warrens listen with the patience of people who have heard countless tales, and then they reveal the darker truth. The doll is not possessed by a child's spirit, as the women believe, but manipulated by a demonic entity masquerading as innocence. With this revelation, the object becomes more than a trinket. It becomes a vessel of evil, a harbinger, a kind of prologue that prepares us for the story yet to unfold. The Warrens take the doll away, locking it in their museum of cursed objects, a shrine of horrors kept at bay by faith and vigilance. From this chilling opening, the focus shifts to a farmhouse in Rhode Island, where the Perron family arrives with the hope of beginning anew. The family is large, lively, filled with the noise of children's laughter, the chatter of sisters competing for attention, the warmth of a mother and father determined to make their old house into a home. Roger and Carolyn Perron lead their 5 daughters, Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and little April, into the aged creaking structure. To them, the place represents possibility, a chance to build a life on their own terms. The house, isolated yet brimming with rustic character, seems almost picturesque in the golden light of afternoon. But even as they step through the door, subtle signs emerge. The dog, Sadie, refuses to cross the threshold. She whines and barks, her body trembling with instinctive resistance. Animals often sense what humans cannot, and her refusal is the first unheeded warning. The move-in is filled with joy and laughter, the chaos of unpacked boxes and children running through hallways, but the house itself resists their presence. Hidden behind its wooden beams and peeling wallpaper, there is a weight, an unseen hostility that presses against the family. That very night, unease begins to coil through the walls. The dog, left chained outside, is found dead by morning. Its lifeless body is discovered by the children, who are shaken by the sudden loss. The parents try to rationalize it as an accident, but the image lingers, a stark reminder that safety is not guaranteed here. The days that follow unravel with subtle disturbances. The clocks in the house stop at exactly 3:07 a.m., as though time itself is being manipulated by some unseen force. Doors creak open on their own. The children complain of cold drafts, of invisible tugs at their blankets, of whispers in the night. Christine feels her leg pulled as she sleeps. Cindy begins sleepwalking, banging her head against the doors of a large wooden wardrobe that seems to breathe with its own menace. The wardrobe itself, found abandoned in one of the rooms, is a relic that exudes unease. The family does not know that it will later become one of the most important symbols of their haunting, a portal through which dread will manifest. April, the youngest, finds herself a friend in the invisible. She speaks to an entity only she can see, giving it the name Rory. Children in ghost stories often serve as intermediaries between the living and the supernatural, their innocence making them susceptible to presences adults cannot perceive. April's quiet games with her new friend are treated at first with indulgence, the way parents humor a child's imaginary companion. But the audience knows better. In her innocent smile lies the seed of horror, that what is invisible to the family is terrifyingly real. Carolyn, the mother, begins to show the toll of the house upon her body. Bruises appear without cause, dark marks that multiply as days pass. She feels drained, her vitality fading as though something is leeching her strength. Her exhaustion is not merely physical but spiritual, an invasion of her very being. The family attempts to maintain normalcy, to pretend that these disturbances are manageable, but the house grows bolder. The noises intensify, shadows gather, doors slam violently. One night, as the girls play a game of hide and clap, a children's game meant to be joyous, the house turns their laughter into terror. Christine, blindfolded, searches for her sisters, guided by claps. She moves through the rooms, giggling as she listens for hands. But unseen by her, the wardrobe door creaks open, and from its darkness, pale hands emerge and clap. The audience sees it, but she does not. This intrusion of evil into a child's game transforms innocence into horror. It is one of the film's most iconic sequences, a perfect encapsulation of dread intruding upon play. As the disturbances escalate, Carolyn becomes desperate. She seeks help not from neighbors or doctors, but from the Warrens, whose reputation for dealing with the paranormal has reached her ears. She attends one of their lectures, where Ed and Lorraine speak to an audience about their work. The lecture itself is filmed like a sermon, with slides of haunted objects, recordings of strange sounds, and testimonies of their cases. The Warrens are portrayed not as exploiters but as burdened individuals, carrying the weight of knowledge that most would rather ignore. Lorraine, in particular, is framed as sensitive, her eyes carrying the heaviness of someone who has seen too much. Carolyn approaches them after the talk, her voice trembling as she explains what her family is enduring. There is a vulnerability in her plea, a desperation that cuts through skepticism. The Warrens agree to investigate. When the investigators first step into the farmhouse, their presence feels like a shift in atmosphere. They are calm, professional, yet their silence speaks volumes. Lorraine senses something immediately, her eyes scanning the shadows, her face tightening as she steps through the threshold. The audience sees what the family does not, that the investigators themselves are unsettled, that they feel the weight of what lingers here. Lorraine's psychic gift reveals glimpses of the house's hidden truth, and her reactions, subtle flinches, haunted stares, become the audience's guide to the depth of the horror. The Warrens begin their investigation with methodical care. They set up recording devices, cameras, and thermal sensors, transforming the farmhouse into a space of scientific inquiry. The juxtaposition of rational equipment against irrational terror becomes one of the film's most fascinating devices. Horror is often treated as chaos, but here it is catalogued, documented, turned into data. Yet even as the machines hum and lights flash, Lorraine feels the presence more strongly than any device could. She sees visions of a hanged woman, of figures moving in shadows, of a malevolent force that clings not just to the house but to Carolyn herself. The children's testimonies add to the growing sense of dread. Each describes different encounters. Christine speaks of being pulled from her bed, Cindy of the wardrobe, April of her invisible friend. Their accounts weave a tapestry of terror, and though the Warrens listen with composure, the weight of their expressions reveals the truth. This is not just a simple haunting. This is something darker, something tied to the land itself. The history of the house begins to surface. Research reveals that it once belonged to a woman accused of witchcraft, a figure who sacrificed her child and cursed all who would take her land. She hanged herself, but her presence lingered, her rage echoing through the generations. Other tragedies followed, families destroyed, mothers driven to murder their children, suicide staining the house with blood. The farmhouse is not merely haunted by one ghost, but by a legacy of violence, a history that has soaked into its walls. This revelation reframes the family's suffering. They are not victims of random spirits but inheritors of a curse. As the investigation continues, the entity grows more aggressive. Carolyn's health worsens, the bruises deepening, her exhaustion intensifying. The children's fear grows sharper, their nights filled with terror. Lorraine, too, pays a price for her sensitivity. During one encounter, she sees a vision so powerful that it drains her, leaving her shaken and fragile. Ed worries for her, reminding us that the investigators themselves are not invincible. They are vulnerable, scarred, human. The farmhouse, once a place of hope, is transformed into a prison. Its corridors feel tighter, its rooms darker, its air heavier. The audience, by this point, feels trapped with the family, caught in a cycle of dread that builds with each scene. The clapping game, the wardrobe, the stopped clocks, the bruises, the visions, each motif layers upon the other, creating a symphony of fear that crescendos steadily. And yet, even amid this suffocation, the family holds together. Carolyn's desperation is matched by Roger's determination, the children's fear by their clinging to one another. The Warrens, too, embody resilience, their faith and discipline serving as bulwarks against despair. It is this balance, the fragility of human life set against the enormity of supernatural terror, that makes the unfolding narrative so compelling. By the time the investigation is in full swing, the audience knows that the family is in grave danger, that the evil in the house will not relent, that the bruises on Carolyn's body are only the beginning of a possession that will seek to turn her into a weapon against her own children. We sense inevitability in every shadow, every whisper. The first half of the story is not simply about a haunting. It is about entrapment, about the slow realization that the family has stepped into history's curse, and that their survival will require more than rational explanation. It will require faith, resilience, and the courage to face something older and darker than themselves. The dread is now firmly rooted, the stakes raised, the family tethered to a house that seems to breathe with malevolence. And as the story continues, the shadows that have been whispering at the edges prepare to lunge fully into the light, dragging the family deeper into horror. The air in the farmhouse grows heavier, as though the walls themselves exhale with menace. By now the parents live in a rhythm of dread, each night stretching longer than the last, each morning carrying with it fresh marks of the house's cruelty. The Warrens, though resolute, feel the weight of what they are facing. Their instruments capture strange anomalies, recordings filled with whispers, photographs blurred by shadows that should not be there, drafts of air colder than the room around them. But even these pieces of evidence, unsettling as they are, pale against the mounting aggression of the entity. It has stopped toying. It has begun attacking. The family's mother becomes the center of this escalation. The bruises that first appeared as faint discolorations have deepened into grotesque marks, spreading across her skin like stains from an unseen hand. She begins to act strangely, her once gentle voice sharp with irritation, her gaze unfocused. At first, her family believes it is exhaustion, the toll of sleepless nights and constant fear. But the Warrens, and especially Lorraine, recognize it for what it is. A slow possession, the hollowing out of a soul to make space for something else. Carolyn, symbol of maternal protection, is being weaponized against the very children she has always sheltered. The symbolism is devastating, evil twisting nurture into destruction. The house, too, grows bolder in its assaults. Cindy continues her sleepwalking, compelled to bang her head against the wardrobe doors as though called by some invisible rhythm. The sound echoes through the house at night like a ritualistic drumbeat. The children's rooms are invaded by shadows. Andrea, the eldest, experiences one of the most horrifying encounters when she witnesses her mother in the grips of an invisible attacker, her body tossed about violently, bruises blooming as if from phantom hands. The Warrens rush to intervene, their faith and presence stabilizing the chaos for a moment, but the message is clear. The entity no longer hides. Lorraine, driven by both duty and empathy, digs deeper into the history of the house and its land. She uncovers the truth of Bathsheba, a woman who lived on the property generations ago and was accused of witchcraft. Bathsheba sacrificed her infant to the devil and, before hanging herself from a tree by the house, declared that she would haunt anyone who tried to take her land. The curse is not abstract. It is specific, rooted, generational. Families who lived here before suffered terrible fates. Mothers driven to kill their children, despair leading to suicide, households crumbling under an unseen weight. The parents are simply the latest victims in a long legacy of suffering. This revelation reframes everything. It is no longer a haunting contained within walls. It is a curse tied to blood and earth. The house itself is a vessel, and Carolyn has become the newest target of Bathsheba's wrath. Lorraine's visions confirm it. She sees flashes of Carolyn standing over her daughters, knife in hand, her face twisted not with her own will but with the malice of another. These visions are so vivid that Lorraine herself is left shaken, her body drained, her spirit weakened. Ed, worried for her safety, begins to doubt whether they can continue. But Lorraine insists, they cannot abandon this family, not when they have seen the depth of the danger. The narrative tension heightens as the Warrens consult the Catholic Church, seeking authorization for an exorcism. Bureaucracy and skepticism intervene. The Church demands formal approval, questioning whether the family is truly Catholic, whether the evidence is sufficient. But there is no time for paperwork. The evil grows stronger daily. This hesitation by institutional authority creates one of the film's great contrasts: the slowness of human institutions versus the immediacy of supernatural threat. In the meantime, the Warrens must act without formal sanction, relying on their faith and experience to confront something beyond comprehension. The family, desperate, considers leaving the house. But curses tied to land are not so easily escaped. The entity follows them, tethered to Carolyn. They realize that moving away will not bring safety, that the haunting is not a matter of geography but of possession. The horror is no longer about the house. It is about the family itself. Carolyn, now visibly deteriorating, becomes the battlefield. Her once loving presence is increasingly overshadowed by vacant stares and sudden, violent behavior. The children, terrified, cling to their father, who tries in vain to hold the family together. It is during one particularly harrowing night that the tension bursts into chaos. The children scream as shadows swarm their room. Andrea and Nancy are dragged and attacked by unseen forces. The wardrobe bursts open, revealing not just darkness but the twisted form of a spirit that has been watching all along. Lorraine rushes to them, her hands shaking as she blesses the room, while Ed attempts to shield the children. In that moment, the house becomes a stage of overlapping terrors, each child targeted, each corner alive with malevolence. The scene crystallizes the film's mastery of escalation. The audience feels the panic of being surrounded, of evil pressing in from every side. The climax comes when Carolyn, fully under the grip of Bathsheba, takes two of her daughters and flees to the cellar. Her face is pale, her movements not her own, her voice contorted into snarls. The cellar, already a space of dread throughout the story, becomes the final arena. The walls are close, the light dim, the air thick with dust and despair. Here, the possession reaches its peak. Carolyn, brandishing scissors, prepares to do what Bathsheba demands, to kill her children as proof of allegiance to darkness. The children scream, their pleas mixing with the guttural growls of their mother's distorted voice. Ed and Lorraine, along with Roger, rush to stop her. Ed insists that he must perform the exorcism himself, despite not being ordained by the church. He has no choice. Waiting for approval would mean death. His voice is steady as he begins, reciting prayers with a fervor born of desperation. The camera lingers on Carolyn's face, contorted, her eyes filled with both hatred and fleeting moments of recognition. The struggle is not just between Ed and Bathsheba, but between Carolyn's love for her children and the darkness clawing to consume her. Lorraine, recognizing the depth of Carolyn's bond with her family, intervenes not with ritual but with memory. She calls out to Carolyn, reminding her of a moment of light, of love, of a family day by the lake where laughter filled the air. Lorraine's words are not holy scripture but personal truth, and it is this memory that pierces the possession, allowing Carolyn to resist. The film's climax here is symbolic. Love becomes the true exorcist, the anchor that prevents the maternal bond from being severed by evil. The possession reaches a fever pitch. The cellar shakes, furniture flies, the air fills with shrieks both human and inhuman. But through prayer, through memory, through sheer force of will, Carolyn resists. Bathsheba's hold falters, the spirit screeches in defeat, and with one final exhale, the darkness dissipates. Carolyn collapses, weeping, her daughters clinging to her, alive. The family, though battered, survives. In the aftermath, the farmhouse feels lighter. The walls no longer press in with menace. The children laugh through their tears, clinging to one another. Roger holds Carolyn as though afraid to ever let her go. The Warrens, exhausted, share a quiet moment of relief. They do not claim triumph, only survival. Lorraine, still haunted by her visions, knows that evil is never fully eradicated, only driven back. But for this family, for now, the nightmare has ended. The final moments carry a note of quiet closure. The Warrens return home, placing another cursed object into their museum of horrors, where relics of evil are kept locked away. Among them sits Annabelle, her unblinking eyes a reminder that darkness persists in the world. The implication is clear. This was not the last case, nor the last scar. For the Warrens, and for those they help, evil is always waiting. The resolution does not erase the trauma, nor does it restore innocence. But it does reaffirm resilience. The parents remain together, scarred but unbroken. The Warrens continue their work, their faith intact but tested. The farmhouse, once a prison, becomes just a house again, stripped of its suffocating presence. Yet the audience knows that its history still lingers, that scars of the past are never fully gone. In this unraveling of events, the story reaches its full arc. What began as whispers in the night crescendos into screams in the cellar. What began as bruises blossoms into possession. What began as innocence corrupted ends with love reclaimed. It is not a tale of happy endings but of survival, of resilience in the face of darkness, of the enduring strength of family bonds when evil seeks to sever them. And so the farmhouse, its secrets now revealed, stands as a monument to what has transpired. To the parents, it is the site of their terror, but also the site of their unity. To the Warrens, it is one more case among many, one more reminder of the fragility of safety. To us, it is a Gothic fable, a reminder that horror at its best is not just about fear, but about what fear uncovers. Love, loyalty, faith, and the thin line between despair and survival. The farmhouse may be the body in which the story breathes, but the true heart of it lies within the characters who move through its darkened corridors. Without them, the shadows would be only shadows, the spirits only flickers. It is through human faces, eyes widened in fear, lips trembling in prayer, voices caught between disbelief and desperation, that the tale of haunting becomes a tale of meaning. Each character, carefully drawn, carries with them a symbolic weight that deepens the film's resonance, elevating it from mere ghost story to something far richer, far closer to tragedy and myth. At the center of the human drama is Caroline Perron, the mother whose body and soul become the battlefield of the haunting. Caroline is introduced as nurturing and grounded, a woman defined by her devotion to her 5 daughters. The farmhouse for her is not simply real estate. It is meant to be a place of stability, of warmth, a sanctuary where she can pour herself into the role of protector and caregiver. Yet the cruel irony of the narrative is that her very identity as mother is what the entity attacks. The bruises that bloom across her skin, the fatigue that drags her down, and the slow invasion of her psyche all represent more than physical harm. They symbolize the violation of motherhood itself. By targeting Caroline, the supernatural force weaponizes her strongest role, turning her potential for nurture into the possibility of destruction. In this inversion, the character becomes allegory. She is motherhood besieged, the domestic turned monstrous. But her resilience, her ultimate ability to fight against the possession and reclaim her children, becomes equally symbolic. She is also proof that maternal love can endure even when corrupted by darkness. Roger Perron, her husband, is less symbolically elaborate but no less important. He embodies the archetype of the rational protective father, but in this narrative, his strength is tested against forces that fists and tools cannot mend. He is shown as hard-working, pragmatic, and deeply concerned for his family, yet powerless in the face of supernatural violation. His role serves as contrast to Caroline's. While she becomes the site of possession, he becomes the witness to his family's collapse, the man forced to reckon with his inability to shield them through physical means. Yet his importance lies not in physical intervention but in emotional presence. He anchors the family, holding them together when fear threatens to splinter them apart. His character reflects the helplessness of human masculinity when confronted with horrors that lie beyond reason, and in this helplessness is honesty. The daughters themselves are a chorus of innocence caught in corruption. Andrea, the eldest, carries the burden of maturity, often shown protecting or guiding her younger sisters. She represents the transitional figure, the child forced to grow up too quickly when terror demands responsibility. Nancy and Christine embody vulnerability, their experiences of being pulled from bed or attacked in the night serving as visceral reminders that evil delights in violating the young. Cindy, with her sleepwalking, becomes a symbol of compulsion, a child pulled into rhythms not her own, forced to move as if guided by invisible strings. And little April, with her invisible friend Rory, encapsulates the motif of innocence entwined with horror. Her conversations with Rory, her games in the house, remind us of how children blur imagination and reality. April's innocence is not destroyed by her encounters but framed as a lens through which truth is glimpsed. In all these daughters, the haunting finds its most potent victims, not because they are weak, but because innocence itself is fragile, easily corrupted, easily frightened, yet strangely enduring. Then there are the Warrens, whose presence expands the story from the intimate to the mythic. Ed Warren is depicted as grounded, steady, a man of faith but also of discipline. His calm in the face of terror is not bravado but conviction, born of years confronting what others refuse to acknowledge. He is the embodiment of the rational believer. His use of instruments, documentation, and research pairs with his invocation of prayer and scripture. His character bridges science and faith, embodying the tension between empirical evidence and spiritual truth. Yet beneath his composure lies vulnerability. His concern for Lorraine, his partner in both marriage and vocation, reveals that even those who battle darkness daily are still terrified of losing what they love. His character is as much about devotion to family as it is about devotion to faith, making him a mirror to Roger Perron. Both men are protectors. One faces the physical world, the other the spiritual. Lorraine Warren, however, emerges as one of the most complex characters. Her psychic sensitivity is both her gift and her curse. She sees what others cannot, perceives presences that remain hidden, experiences visions that sap her strength. The film frames her as both warrior and victim, her fragility inseparable from her power. Lorraine is a character defined by empathy. She feels the suffering of others deeply, so deeply that it weakens her body and haunts her mind. Symbolically, she represents the cost of seeing truth, the toll of carrying knowledge that others are spared. Her interventions, particularly when she reaches Carolyn during the climax, reveal that her true strength is not merely psychic perception but emotional connection. Lorraine is the archetype of the seer, the oracle whose insight is both blessing and burden. Peripheral characters also carry symbolic significance. The priest who hesitates to authorize the exorcism embodies the limitations of institutional authority, a figure of bureaucracy unable to act with the immediacy that crisis demands. His presence serves as critique of systems that prioritize protocol over urgency, leaving individuals like the Warrens to shoulder responsibility alone. The police officer and assistant who aid in setting up equipment represent the skeptical everyman, those who begin with doubt but are confronted with undeniable truth. Their journey mirrors the audience's own, moving from disbelief to recognition as evidence mounts. Among the supernatural figures, Bathsheba stands as the embodiment of corrupted motherhood. Once a woman of flesh, accused of witchcraft, she transforms through history and legend into a spectral force that lingers on the land. Her sacrifice of her child, her suicide, and her curse bind her forever to the house. Bathsheba represents inversion. Maternal love turned into maternal violation, protection turned into destruction, creation turned into death. Her possession of Carolyn serves as the ultimate corruption, an attempt to continue her legacy of maternal perversion. In this way, Bathsheba is not merely a ghost but a mythic archetype, echoing figures from folklore who embody the fears of communities. The witch, the betrayer of family, the devourer of children. Even the objects in the film are characters of a sort, particularly the wardrobe and Annabelle. The wardrobe, with its looming presence and dark interior, becomes a gateway, a symbol of concealed horror. It embodies the idea that terror hides not in distant spaces but in the corners of domestic life, in the objects we live beside. Annabelle, introduced in the prologue, functions as a character of foreshadowing, an emblem of how evil masks itself in innocence. Though peripheral to the Perron haunting, she is a reminder that the Warrens live in a world filled with cursed artifacts, each with its own story, each a fragment of larger darkness. Character dynamics enrich the narrative further. Carolyn and Lorraine mirror each other. Both mothers, both defined by their devotion to children, both targeted by forces that seek to undermine their roles. Their bond becomes one of the most important relationships in the film, uniting maternal strength against corrupted maternity. Roger and Ed mirror one another as protectors, men who struggle with their inability to fully shield those they love. The children, united in fear, demonstrate the resilience of familial bonds, the way siblings cling to one another in terror, finding strength not in adults but in each other. Even the antagonistic relationship between the Warrens and Bathsheba becomes symbolic. The Warrens as agents of preservation, Bathsheba as agent of corruption, each representing opposing philosophies about family and love. From a literary perspective, each character serves as a node in a thematic network. Carolyn represents corrupted motherhood and the resilience of maternal love. Roger represents rational helplessness and emotional grounding. The daughters embody innocence endangered yet enduring. Ed represents faith as discipline. Lorraine represents knowledge as burden. Bathsheba represents history as curse and the inversion of nurturing roles. Together, they form a tragic chorus, each voice harmonizing to tell a story about family, trauma, faith, and evil. The performances that bring these characters to life are essential to their resonance. Lili Taylor as Carolyn pours herself into vulnerability, her body language shifting from nurturing softness to contorted possession with terrifying believability. Ron Livingston as Roger embodies quiet strength, his subdued performance amplifying the helplessness of a father confronting the incomprehensible. The young actresses portraying the daughters offer authenticity, their fear palpable, their innocence convincing. Patrick Wilson as Ed exudes quiet authority, while Vera Farmiga as Lorraine brings fragility and strength into perfect tension, her wide, haunted eyes carrying the weight of the supernatural more powerfully than any special effect. These performances, layered with symbolic depth, remind us that horror is never just about what lurks in the shadows. It is about people, their relationships, their fears, their resilience. By embedding allegory within character, the film transforms its narrative into something literary, something worthy of deeper reading. It is not simply a story of a haunted house. It is a meditation on the fragility of family, the endurance of love, and the corruption of what we most cherish. In the end, the character analysis reveals why the film lingers. It is not only the scares, the screams, or the exorcism that haunt us. It is Carolyn's bruised face as she struggles to protect her children. It is Roger's helplessness as he watches his family collapse. It is Lorraine's whispered prayers, her visions of despair. It is Ed's steady voice as he confronts evil with faith. It is the children clinging to each other in terror. And it is Bathsheba, the embodiment of history's darkest fears, reaching through time to corrupt the present. Every character, every relationship, every symbolic inversion contributes to a narrative that is more than horror. It is myth. It is allegory. It is tragedy. And it is through these characters that the story achieves its power, not in the spectacle of ghosts, but in the humanity that confronts them. What lingers most when one thinks of this particular haunting on screen is not only what unfolded in the farmhouse, but also what surrounded the film's creation in reality. Strange coincidences, eerie happenings, and little-known details seem to shadow the making of the story as though the subject matter itself refused to remain confined to fiction. The movie became more than a performance. It became, in some ways, an experience for those who worked on it, as though the line between art and reality blurred, leaving cast and crew whispering to one another about the oddness that seemed to follow them. To explore these strangest facts is to peel back yet another layer of the narrative, one that lives behind the lens rather than within it. The most often repeated account comes from the Perron family themselves, whose experiences in the real farmhouse inspired the story. Carolyn Perron and her daughters were still alive when filming began, and they often gave interviews about the horrors they endured. What is fascinating is how differently each remembered the events. Andrea, the eldest, claimed the spirits were both benevolent and malevolent, a chorus of presences, some protective, others violent. The most often repeated account comes from the Perron family themselves, whose experiences in the real farmhouse inspired the story. Carolyn Perron and her daughters were still alive when filming began, and they often gave interviews about the horrors they endured. What is fascinating is how differently each remembered the events. Andrea, the eldest, claimed the spirits were both benevolent and malevolent, a chorus of presences, some protective, others violent. She even wrote volumes of memoirs about their experiences, describing them not as fantasy but as lived reality. This variance of memory fascinated the writers, who realized they were not simply adapting one story, but weaving together multiple interpretations of trauma. This multiplicity echoes in the film's structure itself. Visions, testimonies, and memories interweaving like threads of a tapestry, never perfectly aligned. Yet it wasn't only memory that blurred lines between real and unreal. During the filming itself, cast and crew often reported strange events. Lili Taylor, who played Carolyn, confessed in interviews that she would wake in her hotel room at night feeling as though someone were pressing on her chest. It unsettled her so much that she began sleeping with the lights on, whispering prayers before closing her eyes. Other crew members claimed their cell phones would malfunction on set, batteries draining without cause, signals cutting in and out as though the house refused to let communication pass easily. Even the on-set animals seemed disturbed. A dog brought in for one of the early scenes reportedly refused to enter the farmhouse set, echoing the very moment written into the script where the Perron family dog sensed what the humans could not. The strangest event of all came not in Rhode Island, where the story took place, but in North Carolina, where much of the filming was conducted. One night, while Vera Farmiga was staying in her hotel, she opened her laptop to study lines and found 3 long claw-like marks scratched across her screen. She insisted she had not dropped it, and technicians confirmed there was no mechanical explanation for the markings. The image of those scratches haunted her, and she admitted that she often felt a presence hovering near her during the shoot. To deepen the unease, Farmiga later revealed that she refused to take the script home during pre-production. She would only work with it on set or in public spaces, explaining that she feared bringing its energy into her house. James Wan, the director, also spoke about his unease. Known for shaping horror into art with precision and control, he admitted that The Conjuring was different, that at times he felt as though he was being watched, not by cameras but by something else. One night, while on the phone with Lorraine Warren herself, the line suddenly filled with static, followed by a loud crash. At that very moment, Wan's dog began growling at nothing in the corner of his room. The call cut out, and when he tried to redial, the line refused to connect. Lorraine later told him she believed the conversation had attracted attention from the very forces they sought to represent. Lorraine's involvement with the film is itself one of the strangest facts. Unlike many horror films based loosely on true stories, The Conjuring was made with the blessing and consultation of the real-life investigator. Lorraine visited the set, spoke with cast, and guided Farmiga in particular, who wanted to capture her mannerisms with authenticity. Farmiga spent time studying Lorraine's cadence, the way she carried herself, her gentle but firm voice. The eerie part was that Lorraine herself warned the crew, "You're inviting them in by telling this story. Be careful." Shortly after this warning, the set experienced a small fire in one of the lights. Though no one was harmed, crew members whispered that it was the spirits making their presence known. There is also the curious fact of where the real Perron farmhouse was during the production. The original house in Rhode Island still stood, owned by another family. During filming, that family began reporting strange disturbances. Knocks on the walls, doors slamming, an increase in activity that coincided eerily with the film's creation. It was as though resurrecting the story reawakened whatever lingered there. Some of the Perron daughters visited the set, and Andrea Perron later claimed that she felt the same oppressive atmosphere she had known as a child. She even fainted one day while watching filming, later attributing it to the house's lingering energy. Another strange element of the film's making is how meticulously it avoided gore and yet still terrified audiences. Wan was determined to craft fear not through blood or grotesque imagery but through atmosphere, through silence, through dread. In doing so, he drew upon traditions of Gothic literature, where terror emerges from suggestion, from what is unseen. Critics and scholars noted this as unusual in an age dominated by gore-heavy franchises. Wan himself admitted that he wanted to return to old-fashioned scares, crafting sequences like the hide-and-clap game that terrified audiences precisely because of their innocence. It's fascinating that one of the most frightening sequences of the decade, a pair of hands clapping from a dark wardrobe, was achieved without a drop of blood. Then there are the trivial but delightful details, such as how the actors interacted with the set. The farmhouse interior was constructed on a soundstage, and many of the cast admitted that they sometimes got lost in it because it felt so real, with its winding halls and hidden corners. The wardrobe itself became infamous. Crew members refused to stand near it alone, claiming they often felt cold drafts emanating from its doors. Even off-camera, the wardrobe exuded menace, as though it carried the memory of its scripted role into reality. Patrick Wilson, who played Ed Warren, approached his role with such dedication that he studied demonology texts to better understand the character. He later joked that his nights reading them left him too unsettled to sleep. Wilson also bonded closely with Farmiga, their chemistry on screen emerging from hours of conversations about faith, love, and the psychological toll of confronting evil. Off-camera, they often played guitar and sang to lighten the mood, a necessary balance to the suffocating weight of the material. Crew members recalled those musical breaks as lifelines, moments of light in a production filled with shadows. The film's release carried its own oddities. Though it was rated R, it earned that classification not for violence or explicit horror, but simply because the ratings board declared it was too scary. This unusual decision added to its mystique, as few films receive such a designation. Audience reactions confirmed the reasoning. People fainted in theaters, others walked out trembling, and some reported sleepless nights for weeks after. For many, the scares felt more real than those in other horror films, as though the story's claim to truth made it cling to them. There is also the enduring legend of Annabelle, whose presence in the prologue sparked its own spin-off franchise. In reality, the doll was not a porcelain-faced figure but a simple Raggedy Ann doll, now locked in a glass case in the Warrens' Occult Museum. Visitors claim that the doll still shifts positions, that cameras fail in its presence, that one motorcyclist who mocked it died in a crash shortly after leaving. The inclusion of Annabelle in the film served not only as a chilling prologue but also as an anchor to the larger world of the Warrens, a reminder that this story was only one case among hundreds. The strangest fact may be that despite all these occurrences, the faintings, the scratches, the unexplained happenings, cast and crew still speak of the production with reverence. Vera Farmiga called it one of the most profound experiences of her career, saying that she felt changed by Lorraine Warren's presence. Patrick Wilson remarked that though the subject matter was heavy, the experience bonded the cast like family. James Wan, reflecting on the eerie events, acknowledged them but emphasized the importance of respect. When you deal with these stories, you approach with humility. Whether you believe or not, you don't mock it. Even after the film's release, the strangeness continued. The family that owned the real Perron farmhouse reported being overwhelmed by fans, many of whom trespassed to glimpse the haunted house. They also claimed that activity increased again after the film's success, with knocks, shadows, and footsteps returning. Paranormal investigators began visiting in droves, turning the farmhouse into a kind of pilgrimage site for those seeking proximity to the legend. Andrea Perron herself insisted that the spirits were real, that the film captured only fragments of the truth. So what do these strangest facts tell us? They reveal that the story was never confined to the screen. It seeped into the lives of those who portrayed it, those who crafted it, those who lived it decades earlier, and even those who watched it unfold in theaters. Phones malfunctioned, scratches appeared, actors felt presences, families fainted, houses stirred again. The film became a mirror, reflecting not only the haunting of the parents but the enduring fascination and fear that human beings feel when confronted with the inexplicable. In the end, the behind-the-scenes story becomes almost as chilling as the film itself. The actors who felt watched in their hotel rooms, the real Perron family who fainted on set, the scratches across a laptop, the dog that refused to enter, the fire that broke out, the lights that failed. Each detail contributes to a sense that perhaps the story does not like to be told, or that in the telling, something stirs. Whether one believes or not, The accumulation of these details feels like another haunting, one that hovers over the film's legacy. The strangeness lingers. Perhaps that is fitting. For what is horror, if not the feeling that the story is not finished, that something follows us after the credits roll, that the shadows in the corner of our room might hold more than we dare to admit. This film, in its production as much as in its story, embodies that truth. The strangest fact of all may be that the line between fiction and reality is thinner than we imagine, and sometimes telling the story is enough to bring the shadows closer. To reflect on the events within this tale of haunting is to step into a conversation larger than the film itself. It is to consider how each scene, each gesture, each shadowed corridor operates not only as narrative but as commentary. On family, on faith, on trauma, on the invisible forces that shape human existence. The story is structured like a crescendo, each event building upon the last, yet when viewed through a critical lens, these events become more than markers of fear. They reveal anxieties embedded in culture, they echo motifs from literature, they resonate with archetypes that stretch across time. To analyze them as such is to uncover the true power of the film. Not its jump scares, but its ability to evoke and embody deeper truths. The opening sequence with Annabelle seems at first like a prologue, a diversion meant to establish the credibility of the Warrens before the central narrative begins. Yet critically, it functions as a statement of method. By presenting a cursed object, a doll manipulated by evil, the story foregrounds one of its central themes, the deception of innocence. The doll is childlike, meant to comfort, but within it festers something malevolent. This inversion becomes a lens through which to view the farmhouse haunting. The home, too, is meant to comfort, to shelter, to protect. But instead, it becomes prison and weapon. Annabelle thus prepares us for the inversion of domestic space, hinting that evil often cloaks itself in the familiar. The sequence also situates the Warrens as intermediaries between worlds, reminding us that horror is not isolated but pervasive, spilling from one case into another, a continuum of corruption stitched together by human vulnerability. The arrival of the Perrons at the farmhouse is another deceptively simple moment, but through a critical lens, it resonates with classical tropes of the Gothic. The Gothic tradition thrives on the motif of the house as character, a structure whose architecture contains memory, trauma, and corruption. The farmhouse is introduced in golden light, its rustic charm emphasizing innocence and hope. But the refusal of the family dog to cross the threshold undercuts that hope immediately. Animals, in folklore, often serve as liminal figures, sensitive to forces unseen by humans. Sadie's refusal foreshadows not just danger but inevitability, that the house itself will not allow innocence to thrive within it. When the dog is found dead the following morning, the symbolism crystallizes. The natural instinct for survival is extinguished, and the family, blinded by optimism, has walked into a trap. One of the most significant early events is the discovery that the clocks all stop at 3:07 a.m. From a critical perspective, this represents ritualization of time. In many religious traditions, the early hours of the morning are believed to be spiritually charged, often referred to as the witching hour. By fixing time at 3:07, the haunting is framed as cyclical, ritualistic, inevitable. Time itself becomes corrupted, refusing to progress normally within the space of the farmhouse. This event is not only frightening in narrative terms but also thematically potent. It emphasizes that horror here is not random but patterned, bound by ritual, rooted in history. The stopping of the clocks thus reflects the central theme of trauma repeating itself across generations. The children's encounters provide some of the most memorable and significant moments in the story, particularly the hide and clap game. Through a critical lens, this sequence operates as a meditation on the corruption of play. Games are markers of innocence, rituals of joy through which children explore the world. To twist such a game into terror is to symbolize the intrusion of evil into innocence itself. The pale hands emerging from the wardrobe to clap are not merely a visual scare, they are a symbolic gesture of mockery, a spirit imitating and perverting the laughter of children. The event resonates beyond the immediate shock, lingering in the audience's mind because it represents a primal fear, that innocence is not safe, that joy can be invaded, that what should nurture can betray. The farmhouse represents history as curse. The stopped clocks represent trauma repeating. The hide and clap represents joy corrupted. The bruises represent violation made visible. The possession represents the corruption of love. The exorcism represents faith as action. Lorraine's intervention represents memory as salvation. Together, these events form a tapestry of allegory, a Gothic meditation on trauma, faith, and family. Their impact lies not in their immediacy but in their resonance, the way they echo cultural anxieties and personal fears. The film's reception, its reputation as one of the most terrifying of its decade, stems from this resonance. It does not simply scare, it unsettles, it lingers, it makes the familiar strange. And in doing so, it reminds us that horror is never just about monsters or ghosts. It is about us, our homes, our families, our histories, our fragilities. Thus, to analyze the significant events critically is to see them not only as plot points but as mirrors. They reflect our anxieties about motherhood, about love, about safety, about the persistence of trauma. They remind us that horror resonates because it speaks to truths we prefer to ignore. And they demonstrate the power of cinema to turn shadow into allegory, scream into commentary, possession into myth. That is why this story endures, because its events are not confined to the farmhouse, but echo in every home, in every history, in every heart that has ever known fear. The farmhouse on screen feels so convincing, so soaked in shadows and dread, that it is easy to forget it was, in many ways, a carefully constructed illusion. The story told through the camera's lens could not have existed without months of preparation, thousands of tiny choices, and a crew working in strange conditions to bring an atmosphere of terror into being. What is fascinating about this particular film is that its production was not only meticulous but uncanny, filled with odd coincidences, on-set fears, and moments where the actors themselves began to wonder if the story they were telling had bled beyond the screen. To walk through the production is to find a second narrative, one less about a haunting family and more about how cinema conjures its ghosts into reality. James Wan, fresh off the success of earlier ventures into horror, entered this project with a determination to craft something that felt classical. His earlier work had helped pioneer an entire genre of gore-driven horror, but here he wanted something different. A film that returned to the slow-burn Gothic tradition of dread. From the beginning, he told his crew that the film must rely less on blood and spectacle and more on silence, suggestion, and careful pacing. His watchword during pre-production was restraint. This choice shaped every department, from cinematography to sound design, from the writing to the very way sets were built. The goal was immersion. The farmhouse should feel lived in, the terror should feel inevitable, the supernatural should feel rooted in history rather than spectacle. The casting process was integral to this vision. Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga were chosen to portray Ed and Lorraine Warren not only for their acting ability but for their capacity to project warmth and faith without tipping into melodrama. Both actors took their roles seriously, diving into research. Farmiga, in particular, spent time with the real Lorraine Warren. She studied her mannerisms, her voice, her rhythm of speech, even the way she carried herself in silence. Farmiga recalled that Lorraine's presence was almost overwhelming, gentle yet filled with gravity, as though she carried memories of everything she had seen. Patrick Wilson, meanwhile, studied recordings of Ed and read texts on demonology, fascinated by how the Warrens combined faith with investigation. This attention to detail infused their performances with authenticity, grounding the supernatural in human conviction. Lili Taylor, who portrayed Carolyn Perron, faced a particularly grueling challenge. Her role required her to transition from loving mother to possessed figure, a transformation that demanded physical contortions, emotional vulnerability, and the stamina to endure repeated takes of screaming, thrashing, and collapsing. Taylor approached the role with a seriousness that impressed the crew, throwing herself into the possession sequences with such intensity that some on set admitted it unsettled them. She later revealed that she sometimes left the set feeling drained, almost as if she had carried some of the darkness home with her. Her performance was so convincing that the line between acting and suffering blurred. Precisely what made her Carolyn both terrifying and heartbreaking. The children cast as the Perron daughters were equally important. James Wan insisted on finding young actors who could deliver natural, believable performances. He disliked the idea of movie children, who seemed rehearsed or precocious. Instead, he sought kids who felt ordinary, who laughed and bickered like real siblings. This decision added to the film's realism. Their fear in key scenes felt genuine because it mirrored how real children might react in a haunted house. One anecdote recalls how, during the hide-and-clap game sequence, the children were deliberately kept unaware of exactly when and where the claps would come. The result was authentic terror, their startled reactions captured raw on camera. The farmhouse itself was constructed on a soundstage in Wilmington, North Carolina. Production designers researched 19th-century New England farmhouses to replicate the architecture and atmosphere accurately. The wardrobe, one of the film's central objects, was built as a fully functioning piece of furniture, towering and oppressive. Crew members often joked about avoiding it even off-camera. Its looming presence felt wrong, as though it had absorbed the fear it evoked during takes. The basement was also a set piece, built to feel claustrophobic and damp. Pipes dripped, wood creaked, shadows clung to the corners. Though fabricated, it convinced even the actors, who often said stepping into it made their skin crawl. Carolyn's bruises, seemingly small details at first, grow into one of the most thematically rich motifs of the narrative. They symbolize the physical manifestation of invisible violation. Critics have often drawn parallels between her bruises and the history of domestic violence, noting how the haunting literalizes the idea of the home as a site of danger rather than refuge. The fact that the mother is marked, her body becoming evidence of what is unseen, reflects how trauma often inscribes itself physically, how grief and violation leave visible scars. As the bruises deepen, they foreshadow her eventual possession, showing how corruption does not occur in an instant but spreads slowly, insidiously, until the self is overtaken. Lorraine's visions of Bathsheba hanging herself on the property represent another critical point of analysis. This event anchors the haunting not in randomness but in history. Bathsheba embodies the Gothic motif of the cursed ancestor, the figure whose corruption infects future generations. By sacrificing her child and cursing the land, she becomes an archetype of inverted maternity. In cultural and literary terms, she resonates with figures like Medea or folkloric witches who embody anxieties about motherhood and betrayal. Her suicide is not a resolution but a continuation, binding her spirit to the property and ensuring that her malice lingers. This event, revealed through Lorraine's psychic sensitivity, deepens the narrative by situating the parents suffering within a lineage of trauma, a repetition of history that cannot be easily escaped. The sleepwalking of Cindy, who bangs her head against the wardrobe doors, serves as another layered event worth critical attention. On the surface, it is terrifying, an innocent child compelled to harm herself by forces unseen. But symbolically, it embodies compulsion and inheritance. Cindy is not acting out of will but out of something inherited, something pressed upon her by the house. Her body becomes the site of repetition, mimicking the idea that trauma compels behavior beyond choice. This moment resonates as allegory for the way children inherit not only genes but also the scars of their parents' pasts, the invisible burdens of history. The escalation into overt violence, Andrea seeing her mother attacked by invisible forces, the children being pulled from their beds, represents the culmination of the haunting's progression from suggestion to revelation. From a critical standpoint, this mirrors the structure of trauma itself. Trauma begins as unease, as something suppressed or ignored, but over time it insists on visibility, manifesting in ways that cannot be denied. The gradual escalation in the farmhouse mirrors the way repressed histories erupt into the present, refusing to remain hidden. The film's impact is heightened by this careful pacing, ensuring that when violence finally explodes, it feels inevitable, earned by the accumulation of dread. One of the most significant narrative events comes when Carolyn, under the grip of possession, attempts to harm her daughters in the cellar. Critically, this is the narrative's core allegory: the corruption of motherhood. Carolyn, the figure meant to nurture, becomes weaponized against her children. This inversion resonates with primal fears, reflecting cultural anxieties about the fragility of family bonds, about the ways in which history and trauma can turn protectors into threats. The cellar itself is symbolically charged. It is the house's subconscious, the hidden space where secrets fester. To set the climax here is to suggest that the battle is not just external but internal, within the deepest recesses of both the house and Carolyn herself. Ed's unsanctioned exorcism during this climax deserves special attention. The Catholic Church, bound by protocol, hesitates to act, but Ed steps into the void. This act raises critical questions about authority, faith, and individual responsibility. On one level, it critiques institutional inertia, the way systems fail in moments of crisis. On another, it emphasizes the theme of personal conviction, suggesting that true faith is not bound by hierarchy but by action. Ed's exorcism, performed without authorization, becomes an allegory for individual agency in the face of systemic failure. Thematically, it reinforces the idea that love and faith are more powerful than ritual alone. Lorraine's intervention during the possession is another crucial event, one that resonates deeply with thematic meaning. Instead of relying solely on ritual, she appeals to Carolyn's memory of love, of her family at the lake, of laughter and joy. This moment reframes the climax from a battle of ritual versus evil to a battle of love versus corruption. Critically, it embodies the idea that trauma cannot be defeated by suppression alone. It must be countered by memory, by the reaffirmation of what is good. Lorraine's reminder grounds Carolyn in her identity as mother, allowing her to resist the possession. This event elevates the film beyond spectacle, giving it emotional resonance that lingers long after the credits. From a reception standpoint, these events were pivotal in shaping the film's impact. Critics praised the hide and clap sequence for its inventive use of space and silence, calling it one of the most terrifying set pieces of the decade. Audiences reported sleepless nights, haunted by the image of hands emerging from the wardrobe. Carolyn's possession was noted for its allegorical weight, with scholars highlighting its reflection of anxieties about motherhood and the family unit. The stopping of the clocks and the motif of time were recognized as elegant devices that added layers of dread without resorting to gore. The film's reception as too scary for a rating lower than R underscored how these events resonated emotionally and psychologically, not just viscerally. What ties all of these events together is their thematic and emotional resonance. The farmhouse haunting is not random. It is targeted, symbolic. Each event speaks to broader anxieties: the corruption of innocence, the violation of safety, the inheritance of trauma, the fragility of family. The events resonate not because they are shocking but because they echo truths we recognize. We know the fear of homes becoming unsafe, of parents becoming threats, of time itself feeling heavy with repetition. We know the burden of histories that linger, of traumas that repeat. The events of the story embody these fears, giving them shape through shadow and scream. In the end, the critical perspective reveals why this story lingers in cultural memory. It is not only because of its scares, though they are effective, but because of what those scares represent. Each event is a metaphor, each gesture a commentary. Annabelle represents innocence corrupted. The farmhouse represents history as curse. The stopped clocks represent trauma repeating. The hide and clap represents joy corrupted. The bruises represent violation made visible. The possession represents the corruption of love. The exorcism represents faith as action. Lorraine's intervention represents memory as salvation. Together, these events form a tapestry of allegory, a Gothic meditation on trauma, faith, and family. Their impact lies not in their immediacy but in their resonance, the way they echo cultural anxieties and personal fears. The film's reception, its reputation as one of the most terrifying of its decade, stems from this resonance. It does not simply scare, it unsettles, it lingers, it makes the familiar strange. What adds to the intrigue of the production are the stories of strange occurrences on set. Vera Farmiga famously refused to bring the script into her house, working with it only outside or on location. She described waking one morning during filming to find 3 claw-like marks scratched across her laptop screen, unexplained and permanent. She admitted the experience shook her deeply, though she continued with the project. Lili Taylor reported nights where she felt pressed upon in her sleep, as though a weight were on her chest. Crew members, too, spoke of unexplained technical malfunctions. Cameras shutting down, batteries draining without reason, lights flickering in ways electricians could not explain. These stories circulated quietly among the crew, adding to the aura of unease. Even the Perron family themselves became entangled in the production. Andrea Perron, the eldest daughter, visited the set and later fainted during a particularly intense scene. She insisted it was not from heat or exhaustion but from the overwhelming energy of the environment. She claimed the same oppressive feeling from her childhood house was present in the recreated farmhouse set. The family later told interviewers that they believed the act of making the film stirred up the spirits tied to their past. Interestingly, at the same time the movie was being filmed, the real farmhouse in Rhode Island reportedly experienced renewed activity. Knocks, footsteps, shadows, disturbances that frightened the new owners. The uncanny parallel between fiction and reality deepened the film's mythology. Director James Wan, while committed to grounding the scares in realism, was not immune to fear himself. He admitted that while speaking on the phone one night with Lorraine Warren, the line filled with static, followed by a loud crash in his apartment. At that moment, his dog began growling at the corner of the room. The call cut out abruptly, and when he tried to redial, the phone would not connect. One laughed about it later, but his words carried unease. "Maybe I shouldn't have told this story." Such anecdotes became part of the production lore, whispered between takes, fueling both fear and fascination. Technically, the film's scares relied on craft rather than digital tricks. Wan preferred practical effects, doors rigged to slam, chairs tugged by invisible wires, hands emerging from darkness with carefully timed choreography. CGI was used sparingly, often only to enhance what had been physically staged. This commitment to practicality gave the scares texture. Audiences could feel their weight, their tangibility. One of the most iconic scares, the clap from inside the wardrobe, was achieved with a crew member literally hiding inside and clapping at just the right moment. The result was chilling precisely because it was real. Sound design also became one of the production's greatest tools. Wan insisted that silence was as important as noise. The audio team layered creaks, whispers, distant bangs, and subtle ambient tones into the film's soundscape. Yet they also built long stretches of silence, moments where the audience leaned forward unconsciously, straining to hear. Then, when the sound exploded, claps, screams, slams, the effect was overwhelming. Many critics later noted that the sound design was one of the most terrifying aspects of the film, proving that horror often works best through suggestion rather than explicitness. The editing process was equally meticulous. Wan and his editor built dread through rhythm, allowing scenes to stretch longer than audiences expected. The hide and clap game is a perfect example. Just when viewers believed the scene had peaked, it extended, each silence more suffocating than the last, until the payoff left audiences gasping. This rhythm of extending and withholding became a hallmark of the film's structure, its scares operating like carefully composed music. There are lighter anecdotes from the set as well. Patrick Wilson often brought his guitar to filming, and between takes he and Farmiga would sing folk songs to lighten the atmosphere. Crew members described these musical interludes as lifelines, moments of levity in an otherwise heavy production. The children often joined in, their laughter restoring a sense of normalcy before the cameras rolled again. These small rituals of joy became essential to balancing the oppressive mood of the material. One particularly endearing detail is how Lorraine Warren herself responded to the film. When she visited the set, she was treated with reverence by the cast. Vera Farmiga shadowed her closely, imitating her gestures and tone. Lorraine later said that Farmiga captured her essence with uncanny accuracy. After the film's release, Lorraine praised it for its respectfulness, saying it honored her and her late husband's work without sensationalizing them. This approval mattered to the cast and crew, who had worried about exploiting the Warrens' legacy. The wardrobe, again, deserves mention, not just for its role in the narrative but for its effect on the crew. Some refused to touch it, others joked nervously about locking it between takes. It became almost a character of its own. During one rehearsal, The doors swung open unexpectedly, though no one had triggered them. Electricians insisted it was a draft, but those on set swore it felt wrong. Stories like this multiplied, reinforcing the sense that the production itself was haunted. When the film premiered, it carried another curious distinction. Though it contained little blood and avoided graphic violence, it was rated R. The ratings board explained their decision by saying simply, "It's too scary." This unusual reasoning only heightened the film's mystique, and audiences flocked to see whether the fear lived up to the warning. The box office numbers confirmed it. The film grossed over $300 million worldwide, an extraordinary return on its modest budget. The success was not just financial. It revitalized the haunted house genre, proving that restraint and atmosphere could still terrify modern audiences. Critics later highlighted how the production had managed to balance authenticity with myth. The meticulous recreation of the farmhouse, the commitment to practical effects, the dedication of the actors to embodying real figures, all of these choices gave the film credibility. Yet the strange occurrences on set, the superstitions of the cast, and the approval of the real Lorraine Warren gave it an aura that extended beyond cinema. It became not just a film but an event, one that blurred fiction and reality in unsettling ways. In retrospect, the fun facts and production insights reveal a tapestry of craft and coincidence. There were moments of laughter, Patrick Wilson strumming a guitar, children giggling during breaks. There were moments of exhaustion, Lili Taylor collapsing after intense possession scenes. There were moments of unease, Farmiga's claw marks, Juan's static-filled phone call, crew members whispering about shadows. Together, these moments created a production as atmospheric as the film itself. Perhaps that is why the story resonates so deeply, because it was not only acted but lived, at least in fragments, by those who created it. The farmhouse may have been a set, but the fear was real, the commitment authentic, the coincidences uncanny. The production itself became a kind of haunting, a reminder that when we tell stories about darkness, sometimes the darkness listens. And so the film lives not only in its scares on screen but in its myths off screen: the dog that refused to enter, the wardrobe that swung open, the laptop scratched without explanation, the family that fainted, the director who felt watched. Each anecdote adds to the aura, weaving the making of the film into the story it tells. Cinema became haunting, and haunting became cinema, bound together in one of the strangest and most fascinating productions in modern horror. The story of the farmhouse is not only told by its characters, its history, or even its supernatural entities. It is told just as powerfully by the walls, the floors, the shadows, and the silences of the setting itself. The environment in this film does not function as mere backdrop. It breathes, it creaks, it conspires. Every space is charged with unease, every corner hints at something hidden, every silence stretches long enough to make the viewer doubt the safety of domestic life. To understand the impact of this tale is to understand how its settings and cinematic elements combine to transform an ordinary house into a vessel of dread. The farmhouse emerges first in daylight, in golden tones, as the Perron family arrives with all the excitement of a new chapter. Children run across the yard, boxes are lugged inside, laughter rings through the open air. In these first moments, the house looks ordinary, even charming, its rustic exterior bathed in warm sunlight. Yet the camera's framing betrays another truth. It lingers on the house at an angle, isolating it against the horizon, allowing shadows to pool beneath its eaves. The silence in the audio mix is not that of peaceful countryside but of isolation. No birdsong, no rustle of trees, just an absence that feels unnatural. Already, the setting is coded not as sanctuary but as threat. The farmhouse is too quiet, too alone, too steeped in the weight of its own presence. Inside, the design tells its own story. The floorboards groan with every step, an auditory reminder that the house is not merely old but resistant to intrusion. The walls, faded and peeling, seem to hold secrets beneath their layers. The windows, though large, filter light that always feels muted, never fully warm, as if sunlight itself is reluctant to enter. Each room has its own personality, some cramped, some open, some eerily still. The cellar, of course, is the most charged space, a subterranean subconscious of the house where shadows cling and echoes distort. From a cinematic standpoint, the cellar is the narrative's abyss, the place into which the characters must descend and confront what festers unseen. Its claustrophobic design and limited lighting are deliberate choices, ensuring that the audience feels as trapped as the characters who venture within. One of the most iconic spaces is the wardrobe, not just as a prop but as an architectural element of the house. Its sheer size dominates the bedroom it inhabits, looming over the children's beds like a watchful figure. Cinematography amplifies this presence. The camera often frames the wardrobe in the background of shots, subtly reminding viewers of its lurking menace even when characters ignore it. When its doors swing open on their own, the effect is terrifying not because of sudden motion but because the audience has already been conditioned to fear its stillness. It is a perfect example of how a single object, when framed and lit with care, can carry the weight of menace more effectively than any overt apparition. Cinematographer John R. Leonetti's work on this film deserves deep attention. His approach was rooted in the idea that horror is most effective when it feels grounded. He avoided flashy tricks and instead employed slow pans, long takes, and compositions that held the audience's gaze uncomfortably long. This restraint mirrors James Wan's philosophy. Fear comes not from what we are shown but from what we are forced to imagine. Many shots are framed in wide angles, placing characters small within rooms, dwarfed by the architecture around them. This choice emphasizes the house's character, a dominant presence looming